Hello and good afternoon, good morning. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar with Moment Feed. Mobile local marketing, proximity search optimization is the new norm. My name is Erica. I'm the Director of Marketing for the LSA, and I'll be your host for today's event. A few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be circulated to all attendees with the presentation within 24 hours of the broadcast. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end. However, you can ask questions at any time during the broadcast by using the question window in your control panel. If you require any assistance, just send a message via the question window and myself or another organizer will be happy to help. Our moderator for today is Charles Laughlin, one of our senior analysts here at the LSA. So without further delay, I will pass the mic to him. Charles?
Thank you, Erica, and welcome everyone to the webinar. Thanks for joining us today. So today we have Nick Hedges, who's the CEO of Moment Feed, who will be joining me today for our conversation about proximity search. And Nick, why don't you just briefly introduce yourself? You're a relatively new CEO, bringing some new perspective to the conversation about proximity. So why don't you just give us a brief intro of yourself, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Charles. Yes, I'm Nick Hedges. I joined Moment Feed as the CEO about 3 months ago, so definitely very new in the seat, and am extraordinarily excited about Moment Feed and the space that we occupy and sort of the value that we add to our customers. You know, my background, I started at Ogilvy more years ago than I care to remember. So started out my career in kind of advertising and marketing, but have spent the majority running fast growth technology companies, SaaS businesses, and so on. I had been doing a lot of research in the MarTech space around some of the really game-changing advances and directions that technology was going in. And frankly, one of the ones that sort of really had my interest and that I dug deep on was around proximity and how consumers are kind of using devices and technology to help them kind of navigate their world, and how that impacts services and products in retail, restaurants, etc. I had heard of Moment Feed, sort of understood a little bit about what they did, and as I dug in, I found that it was a company that was positioned to really kind of help every brand with a local presence to do better when it came to proximity. And so, was very excited to kind of be able to take the reins here at a kind of time when proximity is becoming such a critical battleground for every CMO of a brand with local presence. So yeah, couldn't be more excited. We have a very kind of steep growth trajectory ahead of us, and it's just a huge honor to be able to kind of lead the company through this. So yeah, that's me.
That's great, thanks. So Moment Feed has branded this methodology, actually, proximity search optimization. I believe it's your proprietary concept or methodology. So why don't you just define it for us precisely, and then we'll carry on from there.
Yeah, so proximity search optimization, is not particularly complicated in what it's trying to achieve. It's essentially all of the things that are required to be done in order for a consumer to find a brand that is proximate to them. Other people might call it local SEO. We feel that that's an inaccurate term. It makes proximity search sound like a kind of category of SEO, and it's not. It's very different. Like, SEO is about finding a corporate website because of the density of links and keywords and so on. Proximity search is a much more kind of important, frankly, area for marketers, because it is doing the things that are much better understood in terms of impacting the signals that determine whether when a consumer does a search and they are looking for a product and service, whether they find a brand, whether it be in a Google 3-pack search, whether it be on an Apple map, whether it be because they're talking to Siri. And the science is similar to SEO, but different. It's better understood, and the outcome is much more kind of immediate. You find a product or service that is proximate, that you're going to take action on right now and visit, versus SEO in general is about finding a corporate website where you continue to do more research and discovery. So we thought it was important to kind of draw a very clear line between the two areas. And
so do you see those two as operating in parallel, in sort of, they both have their place, but they're different things? Or do you see proximity search optimization as a sort of it's not a replacement for local SEO, it's just something that's different from local SEO? Is that fair?
I think the two are quite similar, actually. But I think that proximity search optimization is a better term for what people are trying to achieve with local SEO. And I think by terming it local SEO, it sort of invites comparisons and subcategorization to SEO.
Okay, so you're just to be clear, you're putting out the idea that proximity search optimization is a better description for what people used to say as local SEO.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, just to be clear. Okay, great. All right. So now that you've sort of given us a high level definition, let's kind of dig into this a little more. Sort of who needs to be concerned about proximity search optimization, and kind of let's dig into that a little further.
Yeah, so I think it's any local business. So any business that has a local presence, this is really kind of the most critical aspect of marketing this business in order to drive action with consumers. The way that we look at this is, today there's really two trade-offs that consumers are making. The predominant one is around convenience. The other one is around experience. But really, for most products and services, we've become a highly convenience-driven economy. The internet has sort of trained us to have an insatiable appetite for immediacy. And so the built environment has this inherent advantage. Local stores, local services have this inherent advantage around proximity, where proximity delivers convenience. If I want a product right now, I need to find where I can get that product and go and visit a store. Or if I want to eat right now, I probably want to go and find a restaurant close by to me. If brick and mortar companies don't solve proximity search, so they're not found in a Google 3-pack or on a map navigation app, the alternative is that these products and services will become delivered in home. And that's really what kind of retailers, restaurants, and service providers are competing with. There are analogs for every product, restaurant, and service delivery that are available through internet applications. And so winning on proximity and satisfying the convenience drive of consumers is incredibly important. For the brands that don't solve this and don't get discovered based on proximity, they will lose to their competitors or they will lose to online applications. And so, we're obviously biased, but we feel that, solving for proximity search should be number one on every CMO's lists of investments and focus areas. Because it's so critical.
So is it your sense that, you think of brands, you think of organizations that are ahead of the curve in terms of knowing what drives their business. They have a lot of data to analyze, they hire very smart people. But are they fully caught up with this reality, or are they a little bit behind the curve in understanding just the importance of proximity and optimizing for it?
Yeah, I think the answer is it's all over the map. We work with the biggest and most recognizable brands on the high street. Frankly, that's kind of where we started. We don't kind of overly advertise the brands that we work with, but it is a dizzying array of very well-known brands that frankly use us because they get a competitive advantage over their closest competitors, which is why they kind of like to sort of keep this secret. So, there are certainly big brands that are solving this and that we're helping solve this, and they fully understand that this is kind of top of the list. There are also big brands that are losing in this battle, and when you do, you can sort of discover some of those just by doing a unbranded search on your phone, and you'll find, wow, it's surprising. I'm looking in this particular category, and these gigantic brands that do a massive amount of top-tier advertising and have done for years don't appear in the 3-pack. Well, that's because they have missed this. They have a blind spot to how important proximity search is. Frankly, they're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in TV and radio and print and online advertising in general. And yet, when it comes to a consumer saying, I'm hungry or I want to buy this product, their decision is driven by putting an unbranded search into a Google search box, and they're not finding that brand, and they're going and choosing a competitor. There's definitely it's really quite surprising how some of the big brands are on top of this. And then, let's not just talk about big enterprise customers. We work with some regional up-and-coming brands, relatively new, that are getting a distinct advantage over bigger, better-known competitors.
Well, I was going to ask if truly local business, even independent local businesses, have a default advantage in this.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I won't give too much away about our customers, but there's one particular category in food and beverage where we have the undisputed global market leader, a very, very famous brand. And their biggest competition is the local, what you could call the mom and pop, the sort of local competitors, because when you have one store or maybe two, you can actually sort of you invest so much energy into the marketing of these one or two stores that you inadvertently are often doing a lot of the things required to sort of drive
without even knowing proximity search necessarily. They're doing the things that optimize for it, right? So
yeah, they're sort of unaware that they're doing it, but because they're responding to reviews, they've got a great local social presence, they're sort of getting their data correct everywhere they possibly can on the internet, and they're sort of investing tens of hours every month, if not more, on the aspects that impact proximity search. They're actually ranking in a very competitive way against the multinational brands and the sort of local, global brands in their category. And so, interestingly, this brand in particular that I'm talking about, they're like, our competitor is not A, B, and C when it comes to this. It's the local, the local kind of mom and pop stores that have a following that are kind of really kind of doing all the right things. And that's why we need, platforms like Moment Feed that enable us to operate at scale and get all of these things right.
Okay. So mobile, obviously, this data point, I think, is not a surprise or news to anyone that, mobile is now sort of the majority of search.
Right.
Yeah, but so we sort of all knew this, but what does this mean for the conversation we're having? And, how much of this behavior you're talking about is really driven by this statistic?
Yeah, I think sort of just, you're dead right. Like, there's no groundbreaking kind of discovery here that people are using mobile phones before they're using desktops, right? Like, we have, over the past 5 years, become a very mobile first economy when it comes to how consumers navigate the kind of digital world. But what it means is that intent has changed quite a lot. Whereas, you know, your search activity as a consumer 5 years ago was driven by a sort of desktop dominated, I'm going to go and find corporate websites and do more research and sort of make decisions. Search has become sort of innately immediate in terms of the way that it's used as a tool. It has become the way that people navigate what they're doing right now versus what they're planning to do at some unspecified time in the future. And that's really kind of what mobile has done, because you're mobile, you're like moving around. When you're using search on a mobile phone or a mobile device, you are much more likely to be sort of doing a search that is relevant to your geolocation at that point in time. So it's kind of fundamentally shifted the search system.
Yeah, this sort of naturally makes brand secondary in some sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that it does is because mobile is where search is happening. It means that proximity becomes a lot more relevant. You know, whether someone is doing a search, so let's take 5, 3, maybe even 2 years ago, if someone was doing a search and they were looking for a product or they were looking for a service, they knew that they needed to put some kind of marker in what they were doing to say that this was a proximity search. And so we used to call it, and some people still do, near me searches, right? Like you'd have to say,
yeah.
Right. Copy nearby.
That is all sort of baked into the cake now. That's assumed in the search.
It's 100% assumed. And, you know, now what consumers have recognized is I don't need to put coffee near me, and I certainly don't need to say top 10 restaurant in Chicago. Google knows that intent is almost always on a mobile phone when it's related to a product or service around proximity. Where is this product or service near me? Interestingly, what Google and others have realized is whether that happens on a mobile or a desktop, actually proximity is kind of the modus for most searches. In other words, if I do a desktop search today for ceiling fans, yes, it will give me information about where I can purchase a ceiling fan online. It will bring up, you know, shopping and the ability to kind of order a ceiling fan. But it also knows that if I'm putting in ceiling fans, there's a good chance that I need a ceiling fan now, and I probably want to know where I can buy one locally. And so it will also give me a map and a 3-pack on my desktop search, telling me based on my current geolocation, even though I'm not mobile, where I can buy ceiling fans right now. And so, you know, nearly every search that we do today is correctly being interpreted by the search engines or the devices that we're using as the intent being proximity oriented, which is sort of going back to my first point, kind of one of the things that really drew me to the position I'm now in, just how proximity is becoming this pervasive underpinning currency of intent for everyone's kind of interactions with their devices today.
And I think another thing that the mobile form factor has driven is this notion of lack of tolerance for mistakes or insufficient results or inaccurate results. It's increased the because people are, you know, searching on a mobile device. They're looking for something local. They're not willing to sort of repeat the search or you know, refine the search as much. They need to get a result, an accurate result immediately.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
I mean, I think the networks that have become the most valuable companies on the planet, you know, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Apples, they've done so because they've recognized that they need to give consumers what they want, and they do it very, very well with a huge amount of kind of data and a great deal more kind of intellectual bandwidth than we could probably ever imagine. And what they have determined is a consumer wants to be satiated quickly when they're looking for something, and they don't want to go and do further research on a corporate website or go to kind of some kind of directory. If they're looking for coffee or a burger, or they're looking for a shirt or a ceiling fan or whatever, or a doctor or whatever it may be, the sooner that you can give them the exact information they're looking for, the more satiated they're going to be. And frankly, the closer the search network gets to revenue generation, right? Like these searches are now leading to, predominantly to action within 24 hours. It's a very immediate kind of connection to revenue, which is clearly what the networks want to do, because it kind of increases their value to their customers.
Right. Okay. So no surprise here again, the notion of proximity search being predominant. But let's move on to I think this is the point that we really kind of want to spend a lot of time on, which is this notion of unbranded search, which we've already sort of brought up. 2/3 of proximity searches are unbranded. That's a staggering number. And I think a lot of things that we've been talking about have led up to this. I think the mobile form factor. But what other things have sort of driven this reduction in the importance of brand in search behavior?
It's kind of staggering, right? Like for someone who started their career doing TV advertising for big brands at Ogilvy and Mather, it's kind of depressing how you do all this fantastic creative work and spend your life as a marketer kind of trying to drive people to your brand, and then when it comes down to it, 2/3 of the decision-making searches are unbranded. I don't think it talks to, a lessening of the importance of brands per se, but what I do think it talks to is when search is happening, when proximity search is happening, consumers are getting what they want, and they are sort of inadvertently, implicitly being trained by the search devices, whether that be on a map or whether that be through a pure search engine, that they get a more useful result when they don't specify. In other words, when I do a search for coffee, I get choices. When I do a search for a coffee brand, I'm only going to get that as the response. And so, consumers, just as they're now kind of dropping near me from their search terms, they're dropping branded, because they just get a better result, one where they have some choice. They know that they're going to drink coffee. They probably want to go to a particular coffee shop, but hey, why not see what's even closer? Maybe there's an interesting option that I haven't considered.
I don't know if there's data that connects these dots, but is there a correlation between reduction in branded search and reduction in brand loyalty? I would imagine there is, but I don't know if we can make that correlation here.
I mean,
but it would stand to reason.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly would stand to reason. And I think there's sort of this sort of interplay that I talked about a little bit earlier between convenience and experience, right? Like where convenience is a big driver, the chances of an unbranded search are higher. When experience really does matter, and I think brands have to be very, very honest with themselves about the extent to which experience does matter. Obviously, the brand comes into play. And so that's the kind of interesting nexus of how your kind of online reputation plays into kind of proximity search as well, right? Like how you get to be you figured out proximity search, you're kind of ranking on the map, or you're ranking on the kind of 3-pack, but how do you make sure that you have 7,000 5-star reviews and you're the kind of company that gets chosen? And then if someone's choosing you because of that rating, how do you continue to keep their loyalty and make them associate a highly differentiated experience with that particular brand, so that the next time that consumer does pick your brand rather than doing an unbranded search? I think it's sort of an interesting proximity-based conundrum that brands need to deal with.
Right. And just one last point on this, you sort of mentioned that, all the money they're spending and then on, brand advertising. Is there still a reason for that brand advertising, or is there sort of this lag in how brands are spending their money that they're just catching up to the fact that really it should be all be poured into proximity? Is that fair, or is that brand spend still make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I would advocate that, brand is like an incredibly important differentiator today, as it always has been. People always like to associate with a brand that has values that are in line with them, and I think sort of having a brand that stands for values and then that experience being consistent when a consumer consumes that brand are as important today as ever. And you see that in sort of the activities of just about every generation, however you look at it. So, I certainly wouldn't it would be kind of crazy to advocate, hey, all that brands need to do today is to kind of compete on the unbranded proximity search battleground and forget about all of the other kind of ABCs of marketing. But I do think that there is very, very significant peril for a brand that has built up they've had amazing brand stewardship. They have excellent marketing that is kind of mimicked with the experience that a consumer has, and then they just neglect proximity search.
Right.
It is such a missed opportunity and just a sort of classic way to kind of have your branded activities kind of significantly diluted. So I'd say that getting proximity search right is sort of a critical checkbox that every CMO and every marketer has to get right and has to optimize. The brand and the experience is sort of the differentiation on top that obviously is critical to kind of ongoing consumer loyalty and repeat business.
Right. Fair enough. So, okay, we're here at the proximity search stack, which is, some of these are very familiar, GMB, citations, et cetera. There's a couple of these I think we want to drill in on a little bit. One is reviews. I mean, I think we talk a lot about reviews, but I think it's still something that the importance of which is maybe still underappreciated. And then local social, I think I was really struck by that local social is 8%. I guess it stands to reason, but it still jumped out at me. The local social is 8%, brand social is 1%. So let's start with reviews and kind of focus on what does it take to get to fully optimized so your review piece is doing everything it needs to do for proximity?
Yeah, so I think reviews is a sort of an area that I think most marketers think is important for their brand, but they don't think about it in the context of proximity search.
Or conversion, basically, yeah.
I mean, I talk to some brands and they sort of see it as sort of a little bit of vanity and sort of a self-reinforcing kind of nicety to have a lot of reviews and to have good reviews, but they're not quite clear about kind of the economic value. Right. The economic value is pretty clear. If you have a lot of good reviews, and equally important, and I think this is a piece that a lot of people miss, that you are actively engaged as a brand with your reviewers, it will have a very significant impact on where you rank in proximity. And I don't think many people, I know that not many people know that because we have that conversation on an hourly basis with potential customers. But, reviews is something that all search devices and search engines look at. Some look at it more than others. For instance, we're talking about Google proximity search here, and the the evidence and the research that we have done suggests that it accounts for about 15% of your likelihood of being ranked in the top 3 on a Google proximity search. But if you look at things like Siri, if you don't have ratings and reviews and a star rating, Siri's not going to pick you. And so it has a different impact on different search services. But reviews is important because it really kind of is used as an indicator, and Google will kind of has gone on record and said this: if a brand is actively involved in responding to their reviews, whether they're negative or positive, it is an indicator that that brand is engaged with their consumers, and they use that as a signal to increase people's ranking on proximity searches.
Another thing that's interesting about reviews is that having all 5-star reviews isn't necessarily your objective. It's having a lot of reviews, and it's okay to have a few negative ones, as long as the total score is good. But I think it's having an authentic mixture of reviews is also, maybe I'm not so much for search, but in terms of how consumers perceive them. I think, being solid 5-star is not necessarily the best. I think I've read some data that, the best numbers are sort of like in the mid-4 range, because it's, it's authentic, and it suggests that the reviews are for real. But anyway, the other one, the other piece of local social is what I'm really interested in, because this does seem to be getting back to where we were talking earlier about, do local businesses have that sort of baked in advantage for proximity search? And this is where I think that advantage probably shows up the most. Would you agree? Because someone with 1 shop or 2 shops, or 1 location or 2 locations, can really, as you said earlier, can invest that time in an authentic local social presence. Very difficult for brands to do at scale, right?
That's right. It can be difficult without, obviously some kind of platform that helps you, like Moment Feed does. Very difficult for a big multi-location brand to do this, and it is a kind of inherent advantage for a kind of local store or local restaurant or wherever it may be, because they tend to be pretty active on social, because they're so invested as proprietors in the business, and sort of that communication channel, which is ostensibly free. It is a really important channel for proximity, for frankly a couple of reasons. One, because your local page, your local Facebook page, and your local Instagram presence do have a significant impact on proximity search. I think the other aspect is it's a slightly more controllable aspect of your proximity search, in that you can figure out what keywords are most important and sort of follow a more kind of SEO-like strategy, where your social presence mimics the keywords for which you want to be found. So it's a sort of much more controllable, unbranded proximity search optimization tool than most people realize. In other words, the strategy that we recommend is really kind of uncovering what are the kind of values and experience of your brand that consumers most value, and what are they looking to find, and then use that as a keyword strategy to drive the content that you have on local social. It's definitely a science and an art, because what you shouldn't do is sort of stuff your social postings with keywords and so on, because even more so than a kind of a website, the consumers of social, it's like kryptonite to them. Social has to come across as very authentic and very engaging, but it is an opportunity to sort of really get your kind of unbranded keywords out there in a way that most people don't think of. I think the other thing about social that's sort of interesting, the analogy that people have talked about here, is if you think about how a search device looks at social, with restaurants, it's a little bit like when you're walking down the high street and you look inside the window of a restaurant, and you kind of judge whether you're going to go in there based on whether people are happy, whether they seem engaged, whether there's a lot of people there and it's sort of a bustling environment, and you'll probably go in if you see those things.
Right.
Well, your local social presence is the equivalent of that delivered digitally, right? So whether someone is going to kind of enjoy this brand is largely dependent on the engagement of your social channel. And so it sort of operates like this kind of window front to your restaurant or to your store that shows sort of the level of engagement. And the search engines have figured out that they should decipher that and use that as another kind of aspect of their recommendation for who is in the 3-pack or who is found on the map.
Now, is user-generated content on local social a big factor sort of underneath the local social piece? I think I've seen some like photos that are posted being a big indicator of engagement. And
that's right.
And that sort of feedback, sort of walking by the window analogy you just gave as well. But yeah, it's sort of having the content posted by consumers is a big piece.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the more engaged consumers are with your local social presence, the better. And a key indicator is if someone's willing to post a photo, it is even more kind of valuable than posting words, because it suggests that they're, really engaged. So the key for a brand is figuring out how they deliver authentic content that engages the consumer on their local social channels, so that you get this kind of bustling environment. Because just having a Facebook page doesn't get it done. Right. You have to have to continuously be providing content that engages consumers. And I think I talk a lot about local social, but it's probably worth sort of making a clear point. Most brands focus on their brand social. It's like their corporate Facebook page, it's their corporate Instagram presence. Mm-hmm. That doesn't have very much impact on proximity search at all. But it's where kind of brand managers, marketers tend to sort of naturally orient for obvious reasons.
Right.
It's
well, they can control that fully, right? And from where they sit, and yeah. Yeah,
exactly. And there's some great tools for managing your kind of corporate brand social presence that a lot of brands focus on, but it's not going to have very much impact on proximity search. It's the local social pages that really kind of impact that. So I think that's sort of a key point that people miss sometimes.
Okay, so why don't we? So an interesting, as we sort of talk about proximity search and its importance, it's kind of interesting to ask sort of where it goes. What's the next move, and where does proximity search in terms of devices? We're seeing a lot more, different places and different types of devices where people are conducting search or conducting commerce. So kind of talk about how proximity is going to factor into some of the behaviors that are beginning now that will become much more commonplace in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're obviously biased because Moment Feed is proximity obsessed, but we have a strong point of view that proximity is becoming increasingly important, and the future is one in which nearly every interaction with a device will involve an element of proximity. It probably will become less kind of term search and more just proximity in general as being kind of a key component. But what we mean by that is, for instance, search, as we call it today, is likely to become much more suggestive, proactive, and conversational. And you're already starting to see that with Siri and with Alexa and so on. An example will be, your phone or your device, whether it's a phone or not, is going to talk to you, and it's going to understand a number of different data points about how you are situated, one of which is geolocation, to make recommendations to be proactive. So, you know, an example of this is your phone saying, it looks like you're leaving work late, you must be hungry, because it's probably looked at your calendar and figured out that you haven't had a space to eat. Can I suggest a great new Italian restaurant? It has a table free and it's on your way home. And so, you know, that's an example of kind of technology using a number of data points that are accessible to it, including your geolocation, proximate restaurants, your preference for Italian food, the fact that perhaps a information source like OpenTable is telling you that there's a table free, and making a highly relevant suggestion to a consumer about what they may want to do. And we see that starting with things like Siri and Alexa, but we are strongly of the belief that that's going to become a more and more pervasive trend in the way that we interact with, you know, the digital world. You know, I think the other thing that we're going to see is that proximity is not just going to be confined to your mobile phone, but there's going to be proximity-based suggestions pretty much everywhere. So, you know, an example of that would be, and in fact, my car does it today. My car, if I try and go on a long journey that is further than my battery will allow me to go, it will kind of direct me to a charging station. You know, what a car may do in the future is it will say something like, your front right tire is getting flat. May I direct you to your closest fuel stop, your local gas station, so that you can fill up on air. And then, you know, the other example is where devices or our kind of technological world will start to kind of help us make the trade-off that I was talking about right at the beginning of the conversation around the services and products that are proximate to us versus having the convenience of things delivered to our home. So, you know, an example of that, and, you know, I've seen demonstrations that are sort of similar to this, is your refrigerator saying, you're out of milk for breakfast tomorrow, do you want to pick some up from Gelson's, which the device or the fridge knows that is proximate to your current location. They have organic soy milk in stock, or I can have it delivered by Postmates to you this evening, and it will cost $5.99. So, you know, there's going to be this kind of accelerating battle between the convenience of proximity versus the convenience of in-home, that it isn't just going to be about proactive search that's going to kind of open that up to us. It's going to be our devices everywhere kind of prompting us to kind of make that trade-off and helping us navigate what is better for me, proximity or having this delivered in home. So I think it's a sort of fascinating area that is really sort of, I wouldn't call it as an inception, it's at a kind of fairly advanced stage, but it's going to be an accelerating trend in the way that we interact with the digital world.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, so the one question I had, and we haven't really talked, we've only talked a little bit about voice. But voice search obviously is growing dramatically in terms of the way people choose, you know, where to buy products and services, and voice and proximity are very connected. So how do you think about voice in the context of this conversation?
Yeah, you know, I think voice, the underlying kind of algorithms that drive voice are identical to the ones that drive search. It's just that, you know, the form factor is clearly very different, and therefore the need to be ranked number one is extraordinarily important for voice. In other words, in most voice search types of application, there's going to be one recommendation that is made when you ask for something, and therefore you need to win. Not only be in the 3-pack, you need to win. However, you know, the voice search algorithms, as I say, are similar and in some cases identical to the ones that are driving the search results on your mobile phone when you do a text search. So it's very similar in terms of what you need to do, despite the form that consumers receive it in being different. I think where things are going, so voice is going to be more important in terms of form, because devices are going to kind of interact with us like humans, and obviously humans like to communicate via voice and have a conversation, and that's what kind of devices are going to be doing with us. And when you say to someone, hey, what's the best Italian restaurant around here, a natural conversation doesn't usually involve, well, let me tell you the top three. It normally involves, oh, the best one is whatever it may be, and it's just around the corner. I had a great meal there last week. And so it puts a finer point on being top versus being one of three or one of 10, as it used to be when desktop SEO was kind of the most important thing.
Yeah, so essentially, proximity optimization and voice optimization is more or less the same.
Pretty similar
practices. Yeah. So kind of is getting back a little bit to this branded versus non-branded discussion. Maybe we ought to sort of get into a clearer understanding of where does brand fit in ultimately. And we talked earlier about how it's still important, but will unbranded search become an even greater percentage? It seems to be that that's where things are heading. And so what are the implications? Let's get more into the implications for brands of how brands will matter going forward, and in what role they will play in search.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things, right? So people are still going to do branded search. If a marketer's done an extraordinary job, a brand becomes the only brand that someone can think of when they're thinking of a category, right? Like they don't really think of the category in general, they just think of the brand, and the two become synonymous. That's the kind of holy grail for any brand marketer. And that's going to continue. People are still going to do branded searches.
Right.
When it comes to proximity, though, branded search is going to continue to decline pretty precipitously, because when someone's doing a proximity-based search, they are looking for what's in their proximity, and they are being trained, as I've talked about, to kind of look for options versus necessarily being as brand loyal as marketers would like. So, I think the work that needs to happen for most brands is focusing on this kind of transition to unbranded search, and how proximity search optimization is optimized around the kind of the non-branded terms more than anything else.
Right. And where does one of the things I think about a lot is sort of the importance of customer experience in a way as a proxy for brand, and so could you talk a little bit about how that factors? I don't know if it's necessarily a ranking factor, but it's sort of it's hangs over all of this, really.
Yeah, it does, and actually it's a good point, because I sort of didn't mention it just now in what I was saying, but although unbranded search is kind of the fast accelerating way that people kind of navigate their worlds, the brand is still very important. Like, people's experience of the brand and people's brand perceptions is very important. You're not on a regular search, a non-voice search, you are delivered multiple different options, right? And so even if you're ranked number one on a 3-pack, it doesn't really matter if you're not the choice that is clicked upon. And when people are making a decision about which one to click in on and actually visit or call,
that's when brand matters. Yeah.
The brand matters. And the experience that someone has had of that brand in the past matters. They'll obviously look at the rating. The consumer will look at the rating to some extent. But if they have a relationship with a brand that appears on the 3-pack, they're much more likely to click on that brand, provided that that's a positive relationship, than they are the others that come up. So, you know, brand will always be important. Consumer experience is extraordinarily important. But, you know, in terms of showing up, your brand counts for nothing if someone does a search, you don't show up, and they go and visit your competitor.
Right. Okay, so why don't we kind of start moving into, we're going to save a little bit of time for Q&A, but before we go there, is there somewhere that folks can go to learn more about Moment Feed or what you're up to, and any place you want to direct them to learn more?
Yeah.
I understand you got a new report out. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, you know, we have a website, momentfeed.com. If folks go to momentfeed/resources, there's a number of interesting pieces of collateral that relate to how to go about optimizing proximity search. A recent white paper that we have, the Mobile Local Last Mile, talks specifically about that. And, you know, what we try and do is to provide a kind of holistic, all-encompassing view of all of the signals that go into proximity search. And that's, frankly, what our platform is uniquely designed to do as well. So, yeah, that's where people should find out about Moment Feed if they're interested.
Great. Okay, well, we've saved a little bit of time for questions. So we've got a few in the queue, but if anyone out there wants to ask a question, please just type it into your question window, and I will try to get to it. And the ones we don't get to, we do capture them, and we will be able to respond to you offline later on. So we did have one earlier on while we were talking about local social versus brand social, asking for just a little clarification. Maybe that question's already been answered for this person, but I'll ask it just in case. Basically, some clarification: is local social the public mentioning your business? I think that's an interesting distinction. But I think that's part of it, right?
Yeah. So local social is the social presence of an individual store location, whether that be a restaurant, a service, or a retail establishment or a financial service establishment. But it is, and so if you take Facebook as example, it is the Facebook page for an individual location. That's what local social is about. And when it comes to Instagram, it is your Instagram presence that is specific to a particular location. So, you know, if I am a consumer who goes to a particular location of Home Depot, let's use that as an example, it is the local Home Depot page on Facebook or the local Home Depot presence on Instagram that I interact with as a consumer, because it's that particular location that I have a relationship with versus the corporate Facebook page or the corporate sort of Instagram presence. So that's the difference. And, you know, it is quite confusing to most people because they seem so similar, but the impact that they have, as we've been talking about on proximity search, is quite astoundingly different.
Right. Okay, another question. How would you rate the importance of posting on a regular basis on GMB, Google My Business?
I think it's very important. I think certainly for Google search rankings, GMB is kind of the most critical factor in terms of the accuracy of the information, the quantity of information, and the interactions that consumers have with your GMB listing is very important. So the more proactive that you can be as a brand owner with every single one of your GMB listings, the better, because it is sort of the critical factor. And, you know, let's call it what it is. Google is by far the predominant place where people find brands from a proximity basis. So getting GMB right for every location and getting engaged and posting and responding is very, very important.
But is posting frequently that important, or is it more just having the information complete and accurate and up to date?
So number one is getting the data complete, accurate, and fulsome in terms of as much information as possible, like in terms of the amenities and, if it's a restaurant, like menu items and so on. But then beyond that, yes, it is the volume as well of interactions that matter.
Okay, got another good one here. What are the categories of goods and services that are most proximity sensitive?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I mean, any company, any brand that has a local presence is highly proximity sensitive. So, and the more kind of convenience driven a particular product or service, the more it's susceptible to unbranded proximity search. So frankly, it covers all of the restaurant category. It covers any service that you consume that in location. It covers food and beverage. I mean, it really is a very broad swathe of categories that we cover. And you sort of see it in Moment Feed's customer base. There is no particular vertical focus that you can pinpoint. It is so relevant to so many different verticals. Because
B2B as well?
Sorry, say that again?
I'm sorry, B2B as well as B2C? Business to business?
Yeah, I think it is relevant to B2B. We do certainly have a few customers. I would say it's less relevant because the research that a business does when they're choosing a business tends to be broader and less convenience driven than for consumers. So, certainly I'd say, I don't have the exact statistics, but I'd say 98% of our customers who are obviously focused on proximity search are B2C.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's about all the time we have, and that's we have a few other questions, but we want to wrap it up, and we'll certainly take these questions offline and get a thoughtful response back to you as soon as possible. And but thank you, Nick. This was a great conversation. Enjoyed it. Thanks everyone for joining us. I want to turn it back to Erica for a couple final notes.
Excellent. Thanks, Charles. And thank you, Moment Feed and Nick, for bringing us some great content. Just wanted to give you a little more information on the LSA. You can view this webinar and our past webinars by visiting our website, thelsa.org, and navigating to Insights Webinar. We do host a number of conferences throughout the year. We have Locology Place coming up in 2 weeks. We still have a few seats available, but very few. So if you're interested in joining us at Facebook's new Austin headquarters to talk about multi-location marketing and proximity marketing, now's your chance. We also have registration now open for our regular annual conference, LSA 2020, which is going to be taking place in San Antonio. This coming March. The early bird is open. Now you can save $200 off of your registration until the end of the year. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great day.